What can I do at a proactive level to help these people who are really doing noble work, really dealing with our residents, cooking, cleaning, servicing them? How can we empower them to keep doing exactly what they're doing, but find a way to make them more money, get more recognition, and just make their day-to-day a little bit easier? Because these we talk about it all the time. There's healthcare heroes, there's people working jobs of all types, but we need them because when you and I get to 85 years old, we may not be able to do everything we want to do for ourselves, and we have to rely on people, and sometimes just family needs aren't enough, and that's where senior living comes in.
All right. Thank you so much for hopping on today's podcast. Excited to speak to you today and learn about your work at Accushield. I know you're doing a lot of very interesting work in the whole senior assisted living facility space, also known as like retirement communities, in layman's terms, but this is a huge part of the market. I'm excited to learn more about it and speak to you today.
Yeah, sounds great, Bert. Thank you for having me. I'm glad you didn't lead right in using what we say is the F word in senior living, which is facility. Their homes, their communities, their everything else, their neighborhoods. But the one thing we want to kind of avoid always, which you did right there, which was great, was no facilities. Those are for, a little bit word of the past there.
Yeah. All right. Spot on. Yeah. Let's not use that F word in this podcast. But on that point, Ryan, you've worked from what we've spoken about it across like operations, partnerships, like risk management in the senior living space. What like first drew you into this space and your role at Accushield today?
So I'm going to be honest. I did not think I wanted to get into senior living. I would say that is probably the majority of people who are in operations and communities or some type of other ways is they either grew up in the industry as I did or kind of came into it a little bit differently. So growing up was always going into communities with my family, with my dad who was an ED, bussing tables, calling bingo, doing those kind of things until got into insurance side of things coming out of school. So was working as an agent for Assured Partners, which is, they do a lot of healthcare and senior living insurance, learned a lot of great things there. One of the things I noticed and which drew me back to operations was a lot of communities and a lot of skilled nursing facilities as well, can use that for those ones, out there were a little less proactive on the operations and risk end of things. And we started noticing, hey, if you can get operations a little bit cleaned up and get in front of it, you could probably help these communities a lot more because it's so hard to get out of that day-to-day grind and the slug of dealing with families, dealing with staff, and dealing with residents. Because first things first in senior living, you are a home for residents and you are a community for everyone else. So you want to make sure that their day-to-day is as great as possible. But I know a lot of people out there could agree with me that the day-to-day goals of your business can really get in, maybe in front of your long-term goals as an individual or where you want to go as an organization as a whole. So my job today, and really what I found attractive coming back to senior living, was what can I do at a proactive level to help these people who are really doing noble work, really dealing with our residents, cooking, cleaning, servicing them. How can we empower them to keep doing exactly what they're doing, but find a way to make them more money, get more recognition, and just make their day-to-day a little bit easier? Because these we talk about it all the time. There's healthcare heroes, there's people working jobs of all types, but we need them because when you and I get to, 85 years old, we may not be able to do everything we want to do for ourselves. And we have to rely on people. And sometimes just family needs aren't enough. And that's where senior living comes in.
Yeah, right on. I love your personal story with it. I didn't know that about you, that you actually came into communities yourself, growing up, and you grew up in the industry, like you said. You were bussing tables, doing bingo, and then you started to help out with that. You saw this opportunity or need, I guess, better yet, with the operational side of their business, But some of these communities will see hundreds of visitors a day, right? So to operate that takes a team, and a large staff to operationalize it, Yeah.
Absolutely. And those visitors, that third-party care, volunteers, friends, family, those are often forgot about because we look at those as, either ancillary or a benefit to that staff. If I have third-party care or hospice coming in to meet with my residents or meet with my staff, sometimes I can look at that as, I got extra help in the building. I didn't have to get more staff in here. It's the family's responsible for
Yeah.
them. I'm not. So a lot of the times, some people may be a little bit okay turning that other cheek rather than,
Yeah.
all right, let's data is power. That's all everyone talks about nowadays. So we want to figure out one of the most important things, that is who is and is not in that building, who's coming in, who's coming out, why are they there? And then you can start breaking everything down from that. But that's something that's often overlooked, not just from a risk management perspective, but just as hospitality as a whole. You want to know if your families who want to eat dinner there every day are coming in to make sure that the chef is ready and prepared to deal with
Right.
outside. Just all different things like that, which I'm sure we'll get into as we keep going.
Right, right, 100%. And like, I want to touch on that point you made about like having third party care and hospice
Mhm.
there, like the extra staff. I think there's a misconception in the market, and don't get me wrong, it's important. Like, you want mom or dad to like, have a good chef on site, like have all those nice things day to day, but there's a misconception around like these communities often do have like a lot of what are called like post acute providers and like, physicians and other hospice
Mm.
folks that come into the community to treat, a variety of conditions, and they provide sometimes treatment on site. So on this point, like I want to ask you a question, like, you even describe senior living as a overlooked part of healthcare, like what's like
Yes.
fundamentally broken and how these like communities from what you've seen like manage not just day-to-day operations,
Mhm.
but safety, transparency, like what's broken today and how that's managed.
So I wouldn't use the word necessarily broken when we're talking here. So Accushield as a whole, we are a safety and security company at our core. Our goal is to help communities thrive in all different ways possible. Just because we're signing in visitors, vendors, third party, doesn't mean we are all just physical security. So there's information to draw from each one of those. And it's difficult to do on a piece of paper or asking someone to sign in and sign out, whether it's reading their experience or talking about what they're there to do and see which person, what activity. So at our core, that's what we do. You walk into one of my buildings, you sign in on the kiosk, we take a photo, you get a name badge printed out, and there we go. We're off. That's the visitor experience for me. On your way out, maybe you're asked a few questions about the cleanliness, about the food, about the staff. That's the idea that you're interacting with. But the one thing to think about is you were there as a visitor. Now, what information could you collect from someone who's, helping someone with the feeding tube, someone who's a hospice nurse visiting someone, volunteers coming in, schools, anything like that,
Mhm.
potential prospects. That's where the power of AccuShield really starts expanding. And you spoke on two different things that I think we do a great job of helping with. And that first one is obviously the safety and security. More than anything else, we're going to be able to become similar to an airport. If you see something, say something. You see someone without a name badge, you get a staff, you walk over there, figure out what's going on. That's number one. And that's something that is often overlooked because there is so much of that third party care and so many visitors who, walk in the side door. I'm only here to see one resident. What's the big deal? So
Right.
we're going to play an exercise real quick. So we have 100 residents in a community. That's pretty standard for a lot of buildings out there. And this is, one Miss Smith's family comes to me and they say, "Hey, Ryan, I don't understand why I have to sign in my family members. We're here every day. There's only 5 of us." And so the question is, well, to Miss Smith's family, there's 100 other residents. Maybe they have 5, maybe they have 10. Are you comfortable with 500 to 1,000 just family and friends walking by your mom's door? So that's where the slippery slope starts with senior living. And that's one thing I think as a whole, we could be doing better as an industry is we love case by case basis. Everyone's different. Everyone's the same. That's great. But where does that minimum standard start? Where do we stop overlooking this level of hospitality versus healthcare? There's
Mm.
always a spectrum that communities lean down. Are we more hotel based, where we care about gourmet food and services, and the customer's always right, giving that Ritz Carlton experience, which is fantastic? Or are we leaning completely more practical, where we have nurse carts at your every door, we have stations all over, we have huge staffing numbers. So that's really where we kind of make that divide a little bit. And that's the question for operators out there. Where in that spectrum do you want to lean? If there's a scale of 1 to 10, healthcare to, healthcare to hospitality, where do you fall? because these communities are hospitals, they are apartments, they are restaurants, plus a little bit more. So it
Yeah, you're
takes
not
a
wrong.
lot of, and you only have so much money to work with. These margins are razor thin. So if you have, you can go 33%, 33%, 33%, or you can start pulling those levers and pushing those buttons a little bit to get the mission that you want out of it. So that's number one I look at is where on that spectrum do you want to be? And you follow your security and your safety for your residents along that route. So that's very basis beginning of it. The
Mhm.
second one we talked about a little bit, it's who those people are. So care coordination. You could have, as a community, one home health provider you work with who provides additional services, one hospice company, one doctor. Fantastic. You get all 100 of your residents on there. You sit down once or twice a week with your director of nursing, and you can converse about those. You can coordinate, to hate to use air quotes, but that's
Right,
exactly
right.
where it comes from. And
Yeah.
you can figure out that, hey, we're working with this resident in assisted living, and she's been having some wandering issues. She keeps going out that side door at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and some confusion walking into other residents' rooms. So that's something that maybe that director of nursing didn't quite notice. But there's a home health provider who saw that. And since they know the resident and they know the other groups, they're able to speak up and have that conversation directly with that nurse to say, you know what, maybe it's time for memory care or some programming over in memory care. So that's
Nah.
the coordination on how you work together. And what we've noticed through data at Accushield is that most communities think that there's about 15 to 20 unique service providers that come in their door on a given month, when in reality it's over 50. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's a lot of care and a lot of scale given by, independent caregivers or home health or home care providers that families
Yeah.
set up on their own. And they're just coming in and out without any knowledge to that director of anything that's happening, which could be a large gap in that person's care and in the end, their well being.
When you say like which is a very interesting number, when you say there's in reality over 50 unique providers, do you mean like individual clinicians or do you mean like specialty areas, you know? Like,
I mean, individual clinicians, it
yeah,
could be
which
a
is
nurse
still a huge,
from 10
yeah,
hospice companies, five different private caregivers, 10 different staffing
right.
agency workers. Kind of starts adding up from there. But that's really where it gets difficult is if I have 100 residents and they're using 25 doctors, it gets very difficult on that director who's handling medication orders to be able to keep everything straight. And then to keep everything, one of the examples we always get is Friday night. You need to get a new med in. You've never met this doctor before. And you're trying to get that filled through that doctor's office. You're going to script signed off on, and there's no
Yeah.
connection there. You can't text them and say, hey, I need this approved. You can't call them and say this. You're going through the proper channels. It gets really difficult with care. And you can ask any nurse out there. Nursing is very personal. Nursing and caregiving is one on one. It's observing behaviors, it's knowing your residents and looking for change of conditions. And it's really difficult to do that if you can't have that conversation sitting across the table from someone.
Interesting. No, I couldn't agree more with you. Nursing is very personal, you know, and that's why with the whole shortage of nurses that it's happening, you know, nationwide, that's impacting, you know, patient level care. But I want to drill into like how you guys are specifically approaching these challenges at AccuShield around care coordination. I
Mhm.
love this like analogy you gave with like where do you lean on the spectrum of hospitality versus healthcare? Because it's so true, you know. Like what do you think sets your guys' model apart from like other solutions on the market when you think about those challenges?
Definitely. One of the big things is we are a tangible touch point. We sit at that front desk and we are there to assist the concierge. So not only are we collecting that information through feedback, through time in, time out, who are these people coming in for care coordination, we're doing all of those things to assist that person at the front desk, to not make it more difficult, to help them to start with. So that's the big portion one. Is yes, that can work on both the hospitality end because we can welcome people into the building. They can get their name badge. So when I walk up to you on the tour for the first time, I know you're here, I know when you're here, and I know your name. We were talking a little bit earlier before we started this podcast on pronunciation.
Yeah,
That's an important thing to do to just kind of have any idea on how you welcome someone into the building the first time. That's
yeah,
where we assist on the hospitality end. But on the healthcare end, we are checking those people. Like we said, we're essentially a time clock for agencies, for third parties. So you can see when this person got there, who they were there to see. when they left. But that's where it starts. So now the question is, I'm using XYZ home healthcare, you know,
Mm,
for some of my residents in independent living. What we can do is we have a product called Accushield Verify, where the home healthcare team itself has to upload their documents. So I can make sure I see this person as a clean criminal background check. I know they have a valid nursing license. I know their TB's been checked. They are not on the sex offender registry list. And that's when we give them an Accushield verified stamp, allow them to come into the building. And that's how you know that this organization, top
yeah.
to bottom, is committed to hiring people who actually have the documents. Little known fact out there is risk management hat going back on here is if I sign an agreement with you as a staffing company or an agency, that agreement says that you're going to background check all your employees. You're going to, whether it's drug screen or anything else, you're going to follow that piece of paper there. So
Yeah.
if a lawsuit does occur or a claim does occur, sure, I get hit as the community and I get names, but I'm looking at that. I'm going to subrogate that onto the agency or onto the staff where the actual faults occurred. So it gets tied up in the court battles here more than anything else and in litigation. And we think that it would be a little easier if we get proactive. If we flag an agency that keeps sending you, batteries and assaults from Florida, and now they move to Georgia and they're not coming up on a local background screen, we want to be able to snuff that out for those communities and let them know that these people that are coming in that did not meet your standards, that did not meet your requirements as an organization, are not up to snuff for exactly what you want and to be around your residents. And if you're here to provide a safer, more secure location for loved ones, then that's something you need to be doing as well. It's not just where they're coming from, but now who they are and do they have all of the credentials to be in your building. So that's where we really come in with the care coordination and making sure we are using groups that are bought into that same process.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. I mean, it's almost like this visitor sign in and entry management like solution you guys have. I know you do more than just that because you touch a lot of safety and security components. Like it's geared towards not just like you called it the hospitality end of like people visiting or like family members, but or the residents themselves, but like the actual caregivers, like the providers that come and visit for the healthcare side of it. So it's
Yeah.
like it serves essentially like the word says visitor, but the two different types of visitors that often come in, and like ensuring that I love this whole badge concept. I mean, it's the same thing, same badge you get on like any platform has that, right? With a lot of
Yeah.
eyeballs, X, like LinkedIn, like a lot of these
Mhm.
platforms out there have this verified badge. And if we could do the same thing with our communities, which, like you said, like no daughter or son of a mom or dad wants to be worried about who comes and visits, or passes by their family member's room. So it's very fascinating.
We look at this, we already do this in hospitals and schools. So we're doing it for already our vulnerable populations. Seniors are another one. The difference is rather than kids, they have narcotics, they have cash, they have antiques, valuables, all of these things behind those doors. So a
Yeah.
lot of the time, I think people who work in communities, being one of them, I can think, why would anyone want to come here? This could seem like just any job. It seems boring
Yeah.
in your day to day. You're working, once you're in the middle of something, it doesn't seem different. But from the outside, we've turned around and we've seen a lot of groups start targeting senior living communities. One way or another, whether it's because of theft or something else, because they've realized the security's low. And they know that staff aren't quite looking around for that type of visitor or that actor first. They're looking after the residents first, which is great. That's their job to focus on. And that's where we step in and go, we want to be that barking dog. We want to be that, ADT sign that sits in your front lawn that curbs some of those bad actors from coming in. There's
Right.
one thing I kind of always break down a little bit here that really explains where senior living is from someone who's kind of out of the loop a little bit more. So you're going to buy a home or you're going to look for an apartment, but you're that place that you're looking for. You want to be safe. You want it to feel secure. You'd rather there be a guard gate or a gate code, security cameras, anything like that. But now let's think you're going on a trip for work and you're going to stay in a hotel. How much research into that hotel are you doing for, oh, there's security cameras here. They're located in this location. They're, XYZ other things. Not quite as much because that's not where you're moving. That's not where you're up. That's not where you're planting roots with your family, with your
Right.
valuables with your entire life. And that's the difference between a community and a hospital. So we're already doing those things for hospitals. We're making sure that anyone who comes in is badged. Maybe there's a criminal background check. Maybe it's a database they run against through. But what's not in those hospitals are that person's valuables, are that person's family, are that person's pets, their dogs, their cats. So we're already doing these things in places that, yes, they're targets,
Yeah.
but they may not be the same type of target. So what we're trying to do at Accushield is really for some of those hospitality focused communities, not tell them what they're doing is wrong because everyone does things differently. Everyone has unique circumstances, but it's to just show them, here's what that risk could be. And if we want to get in front of it and try to mitigate it a little bit, that's where we're here to help, as well as create, a wonderful, fun customer experience and visitor experience that I am recognized for coming into this building.
Yeah. I love that analogy you gave to break down the difference between communities and hospitals, with your home versus when you travel for work and stay at a hotel. That's that analogy is spot on. Really, Ryan, what it like also comes down to that this all alludes to me is like what that initial impression is when you go to a community and
Yeah.
meet someone at the front desk. Like often that is what like lands with a visitor or the providers are there to render a service, but like really
Yes.
visitors, like oftentimes it's the initial impression. It's like you go to a restaurant and if you have a bad experience with the person checking you in, like it kind of sets the mood already off from when you
Mhm.
sit down or get ready to eat, like so that initial impression is so invaluable. Don't get me wrong, risk it or very
Oh, yeah.
important to manage if you're an operator, like and for all the reasons you laid out, potential lawsuits, understanding your visitors, etc. But oftentimes it comes down to that first impression, could be the difference of signing a new resident or not, or getting their family on board or not, so.
And for keeping residents, it comes down to speed to correct. Maybe you have, family visiting from out of town and they go and they sit down and they have a horrible dining experience. The food was cold, the servers were rude, the table wasn't cleared, all of these different things occurred. And on the way out, you're able to review. How was your experience today? And we're going to collect that through AccuShield, send that right back to the community or to Google, depending on how it goes. But that gives that person and that manager an immediate chance to correct that action, to go see exactly what happened, to talk to that family, and to make changes that are needed. So you can be healthcare and hospitality, but it all comes
Yeah.
down to corrective actions. And if you don't have that tool to collect, you can't correct.
Right. Yeah, spot on. And tell me a little bit about the like real world impact you're seeing across communities that use
Mhm.
AccuShield. As I know we spoke a lot about visitor and like entry level management, but I think you guys
Yeah.
also do work with like Google reviews, like preventing incidents before they happen. Like you talked about just
Yes.
corrective actions just now. What type of real world impact are you seeing? Like any numbers or stories come to mind there?
Oh, absolutely. There's anecdotes galore. I'll touch on just a few. So, one in a community that we were servicing, we'll say they had a resident in assisted living who met someone online, which said they were going to be a caregiver, said they were going to be a friend. Everything lines get a little blurry there.
Yeah.
Next thing we know, family calls us that someone is writing checks out of her checkbook, multiple thousands of dollars at a time, and cash is just draining out of the account. We're able to use AccuShield with that community, identify who that person was signing in, because to them, I'm a visitor. I'm signing in. I'm going to see my friend. They think,
Right.
they're being sneaky and going right through by following the rules kind of thing. So what we're able to do, pinpoint who that person is, take that phone number, flag it. So in AccuShield, we're able to do banned visitors. So we put this person on the ban list. We
Ah,
have their photo. We have their contact information. The next time they go to sign in, it shows we won't get into the specifics,
yeah,
but
there's a
that's
red flag. There's a red flag. Yeah.
absolutely. And director, maintenance director, everyone is notified that this person is here. So what is then
Wow.
allowed to occur is you're able to converge on that person and ask them to leave. You now have them. You know who they are. You know what they're doing. You know who they are, when they are, and this is your banned person. You're able to approach them. Deal with authorities if needed, or just ban them from the property. So right there's a type of corrective action. Another one that we've been able to help communities with is I come in, I'm diabetic and my son signs me out for lunch. A lot of medications can only be given in certain windows of time. So let's say there's a 2-hour window for me to get my insulin. that's administered by a nurse at the community. I go out, we have a grand old time. We go to the fair, I have funnel cakes, milkshakes. On the way back, we stop, we get Chick-fil-A and ice cream and all of this.
Yeah.
My blood sugar crashes. Or I have an issue with my blood sugar once I'm back at the community. Residents sign, and I got a little ahead of myself there. So what's going to occur is that family may call that community back up and go, what the heck happened? How did you allow this issue to occur? How did you mess up my dad's meds? What we're then able to show is from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock at night, dad was signed out with you. We aren't allowed legally to give these medications needed within this time frame, and whether it's insulin or anything else. Just an example of showing that this person was signed out from this time to this time by this person, and this is why the community wasn't able to administer meds or administer care, or maybe they missed their shower. But
Yeah.
it was putting the onus on where the issue actually occurred. So that's another one there. It jumps into so many different ways on how we can really communicate. But it comes back to what you said, first impressions as well. I'm signing in for a tour. You know, maybe it's not a scheduled tour. I get tour, sign in, send my name. Now I'm going to get a text sent to all of the managers. Say, you have a tour here. I'm not sure if anyone out there has worked in any of these apartment leasing or anything like that, or I'm sure everyone's experienced it, even going to lease an apartment. You walk in and there's no salesperson there. You're not going to wait more than 5-10 minutes waiting around. That's a sale that you could have just lost because there was no tool for that first impression. There was no speed to lead in a physical setting. So that's something else we help with, is letting you guys know, hey, we're busy with residents, we're busy with families, but there's a tour up there and someone needs to get up there to at least make contact with them.
Yeah. Wow. Those are three very powerful stories from the resident that, somehow had someone visiting and taking checks out of their account. Another one at the diabetic resident being signed out and having that whole ability to track the history, and then finally like signing people in for tours, but like having visibility. Hey, someone's here. Like someone's here for their tour, so you don't lose out on those potential residents.
Yes.
Now,
So
what do you think are like the biggest barriers to adoption of this space? Because what you're describing, it seems like a very fascinating piece of like technology to me. Like, what are the barriers here? Is it like staffing mindsets? Is it budget constraints? Operational resistance from people that may not be like you, that have seen how different communities operate? And like, what are the biggest barriers to adoption? And how do you help communities like move forward from those?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a little bit of all of those.
Yeah.
In one way or another. Budget constraints, obviously. A lot of these senior communities, they're built for older adults. So on the surface, you don't think you need that much technology. And when these budgets were built with the banks or the lenders or whoever they were, well, you guys need $3,500, $4,000 a month, if that, for software and technology and those things. So that's one, is we're working with a line item that is very strict. Maybe it's only priced in their EHR, their electronic health records, or their med management, or
Like
a
PCC.
CRM for sales. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one. And so now you're saying we can't necessarily show how this impacts our care, and it may not be needed by the state, but we want to put this in that same line item. There's number one right away. It's just pure budget money. It's thought of as a nice to have more so than a necessity on the surface. And that's how things kind of begin. And that's what our job is, kind of how we're talking about today, not to scare anyone, but to just say, here's the flip side of things. If you guys are okay taking that risk, that is okay. We'll be here. We're not going to go, I told you so later. We're always here to help. That's our goal, is to help communities thrive, help them be safer and more secure. So always budget constraints are number one. I would say, though, the largest underlying issue that we face isn't necessarily staff adoption, as much as it is that this is the only, I wouldn't say the only, but one of the only softwares and systems, technology, whatever you want to call it, that has an implementation that I am asking for behavior changes to people I'm not paying. So that's really where it gets difficult. If I implement PCC, I look at my CNAs, my med techs, my nurses, I go, hey guys, this is where we're doing charting. This is where we're doing assessments.
Right.
This is where we're managing residents from now on. Same thing with a payroll company or anything else. But now I'm talking with my visitors who actually pay me, and vendors and other, staff workers coming in and out. And now I don't hold those purse strings. I don't write them checks. They're not in my chain of commands. And
Right.
I can't just tell them, do this. Some will comply. But those ones who have been coming in, let's say 3 years before the system, will look at you and go, why? Why do I have to do this? And that gets us back to that conversation of, you know, it's okay for you, but the slippery slope does happen if we do this for everyone. And that's really the largest adoption issue we have is these staff and these communities are so slogged and bogged down with the day-to-day grind of being in those communities that
Yeah.
now having to put that friction in front of it's short-term friction. That's the one thing we always say is that,
Right.
yeah, it's going to be a little painful and there's some changes at the beginning, but once this gets up and this gets thriving, it goes on autopilot. And that's
Yeah.
really what we try to help communities get to is what do you want to collect from this service category? What do you want from this one? What do you want from family, friends? What
Right.
feedback do you want to collect? And then we're off and running. But you can't get the data and you can't get to those insights and the changes that you may need to make and the feedback if you don't show people to buy into the system and say that using this tangible touch point will yield better results, not just for the residents, but for the visitor experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's spot on. Like, I mean, I would flip that question back on them, right? Like, yes, this
It
is
is,
like you're
yeah,
implementing a technology of fair behavior change that, we're not paying you for, but, at the end of the day, do you want to pay positive dividends back to the community? Like, yes, it may seem like a lot of tedious work right now, but in the long term, it's going to, really help the visitors that are visiting and also like your community and staff, like that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
and everyone nowadays ROI, ROI, ROI is the number.
Yeah.
What is the soft ROI that occurs? That's sometimes what's a little bit harder to wrap our heads around. We can look at switching payroll systems. I paid $20 a check this month to $10 a check. No brainer. They could do everything the same. I'll switch payroll systems and save money. What we're talking about here is
Is
much
that,
more soft ROI. It's
uh,
if I walk into a community that has Accushield and I'm able to talk about it as a sales director and say that here's the security system we do, here's how we care for residents, and then I walk into a community that doesn't, and I ask about how do you monitor visitors? How do you secure our community? How do you deal with, people who are taking care of residents who may have criminal records on their backgrounds?
right.
So that's what we start to look at. And it's more of once you experience a community who is buttoned up, who's thriving, who is using AccuShield as a system that is important, you feel the difference going into one who doesn't. There is less insight. There is less, monitoring and control of that front desk. Some places want it like that, and that's great. But we are always of the belief that transparency is good in healthcare and that transparency is the key to better care outcomes at the end of the day.
100%. Yeah. There's certain things like, you called it a soft ROI, that need to be evaluated in a different light. That's not just financial, impact, right? Yeah, right on. So, with that said, where do you see like AccuShield like headed next, and how can like interested communities get involved with you or your team online?
Yeah. So if anyone ever wants to have what's a conversation like this, see if we're the best fit for you, or just do a security evaluation, a risk evaluation, you can reach me on LinkedIn, just at Ryan Mills at AccuShield, or my email is ryan.mills at accushield.com. Not too difficult to find,
Yeah.
but where I see us going from here is we're going to keep expanding that Verify product. We're going to keep trying to make that something where we truly have a alliance and a network of these providers who are all bonding together and saying we want to do what we view as the right thing, meaning we want to be transparent with our hiring practices and we want to help communities make the best decision for when they do need third-party care and when families do as well, and raise the standard of care across the board. We're doing that by combining both communities, families, and these strong providers together to raise the just level of everyone out there. The rising tide raises all ships. That's what
Right.
we're trying to do with both security and verify until we get to the point where we notice that these residents who are being serviced by these specific providers or these communities that are using this product are thriving. They're doing maybe a little bit better than ones who are pulling the wool over their eyes and letting things just continuously occur everyone has their systems. We just want to step in and see maybe we can help, maybe we can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, I love the again, I know you're full of these great analogies, but the rising tide rises all ships is true. And also like for a lot of like community leaders out there, it's really looking at like nearby communities, like, hey, my peers are like actually using a technology
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this that's helping their
exactly.
staff, like you start to see the ships around you as well and they're rising. So it's rise with them, or your potential residents will move on to another community, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And what we do, I would say very well at Accushield is we listen. We sit down with, our CEOs, COOs, CRMs out there from these communities, and we say, you guys see where we are right now. Where are the holes in our system? Where are the holes in your systems? And what can we do to really partner together and do that? We are a company that's driven by senior living and driven for senior living. It's not, a private equity startup that comes in completely and says, all right, we have this system that could work for any industry. Let's slap a label on it and make it for senior living. We are
Right.
ground up healthcare based, healthcare focused, healthcare at our core, and helping people is what healthcare does. So that's what we want to do at the end of the day.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great way to conclude things here. Ryan, it's been a pleasure
Yeah,
speaking to you and learning about the work you're leading the charge on with AccuShield and different communities. Love that, your personal story and how you started, servicing a lot of communities and working with your family through them. And now, it's clear you're have become a strong operator for these communities and excited to keep tabs on your guys' journey and see how your products and solutions evolve. And thanks for being a great guest today on the podcast.
yeah. Thank you, Bert. And, would love to do it again as things change and,
Yeah.
landscape keep shifting.
100%. I know we don't like to use the word silver tsunami, but there is a huge baby boomer population coming.
Absolutely.
We'll have that. Like my own father would need to make the choice of like, do I go the home health route? Do I go the facility route? And the facilities have been, sorry, I know we don't call them facilities, like the communities, senior
Yeah.
living
There we
communities
go.
have been there for decades. They must be doing
Mhm.
something right, and it is the right choice for, some families, right, that don't have access to the same resources to do home health, right? So yeah.
Personal decisions are, it's case by case for everyone. When you're making your decisions, communities are snowflakes. You don't fit in with everyone great. You sometimes find your place and you're like, I never thought I could live in one of these. And
Yeah.
then suddenly you find your community. And that's where that
Yeah.
word comes from.
Yes, spot on. Well, great talking to you today, Ryan. And again, thanks for all the good nuggets and excited to share this one with the audience. Thank you.